Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, staring absently at the swirling steam rising from her mug of tea. The soft rustle of leaves outside the cottage was the only sound breaking the silence, but it did nothing to ease the tightness in her chest. Her husband, David, had been distant lately, and it was becoming unbearable. What had once been a passionate and intimate connection now felt like a hollow routine, a daily grind with no spark left. It wasn't just that David had been working long hours at his business or spending evenings locked in his study. The worst part was how much he seemed to pull away from her. They barely talked anymore, and when they did, it was always about trivial things, nothing that truly connected them. He didn't look at her the way he used to, and she wasn't sure if it was because of her or because of something deeper inside him. As if on cue, the sound of the front door creaked open, followed by David's voice echoing faintly from the hallway. She looked up from her tea, expecting him to walk in, but instead she heard him talking to someone. A laugh. Lucas's laugh. Evelyn's stomach churned. Lucas was their young neighbor, always willing to help out, always there when David needed an extra pair of hands around the house. He was charming, a little too much so at times. Evelyn couldn't deny that she'd noticed the way Lucas looked at her, the way his eyes lingered just a moment too long when he spoke to her. It made her uncomfortable, but she never said anything. David would brush it off as nothing. But today, something felt different. After a few minutes, David appeared in the doorway, his expression unusually serious. "Evelyn, we need to talk." Her heart raced. She hadn't seen David like this in months, his usual calm demeanor replaced by something more intense. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting her tea down. David closed the door behind him, stepping into the room. He took a deep breath before speaking, his gaze fixed on hers. "I've been thinking about us, about where we are, and I think we need to make some changes." Evelyn felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Changes? What kind of changes? David hesitated for a moment, as if weighing his words. "I think we need to try something different. Something that could reignite what's been lost." Evelyn's mind raced. She didn't understand. What could he mean by different? They had tried so many things already to fix their marriage, but none of it had worked. She opened her mouth to respond, but David interrupted. "I'm not saying it's easy, but it's the only way I know how to get us back to where we were." His voice was low, earnest, but Evelyn couldn't shake the growing sense of dread. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. David stepped closer, his gaze softening. Maybe we need to explore something outside of ourselves, something that would force us to confront what's holding us back." Evelyn blinked, her heart pounding. She couldn't bring herself to ask, but the unspoken question lingered in the air. What exactly was he asking her to do? David's silence filled the room, and Evelyn knew she couldn't avoid this conversation any longer. Their marriage was standing on the edge, and she wasn't sure which way it would fall.
The next few days were filled with uncertainty. Evelyn's mind kept circling back to David's words. We need to try something different. What did that even mean? And why was he so adamant about it? She hadn't been able to shake the feeling of unease that had settled in her chest since their conversation. David had been quieter than usual, retreating back into his study. He wasn't making demands, but the tension in the house was palpable. Evelyn couldn't ignore the way he looked at her sometimes. Like he was waiting for something, unsure of what, but expecting her to make a move. It was Lucas who broke the silence. One afternoon, as Evelyn was tending to the garden, she heard a voice behind her. She turned to see Lucas standing at the fence, his usual easy smile on his face. "Need some help with that?" he asked, motioning to the weeds she was pulling from the flower bed. Evelyn hesitated. She knew she couldn't keep avoiding him. David was fully aware of the growing attention Lucas paid her. And perhaps he wanted this, too. Some part of her felt guilty for even entertaining the thought. But another part of her was curious. Could this truly help? Could David's strange proposition really reignite something between them? Sure, Evelyn said, stepping aside to let Lucas join her. His presence was warm, comforting, and for a moment, she felt the weight on her shoulders lighten. They worked side by side in silence for a while, the hum of the summer air surrounding them. Eventually, Lucas broke the quiet. "You've been distant lately," he said, his voice casual but knowing. "How's everything going with David?" Evelyn looked up, startled by his directness. She hadn't spoken to Lucas about her marriage, but it felt as if he had been waiting for her to open up. "It's complicated," Evelyn replied slowly, feeling the knot in her stomach tighten. "David's been distant and I'm not sure what to do." Lucas paused, his gaze softening. "You know, sometimes it helps to talk things through. I don't think it's healthy to keep everything bottled up." She considered his words, torn between her loyalty to David and the strange sense of understanding she felt in Lucas's company. Before she could respond, he stepped closer. His hand brushed against hers lightly, and the touch sent an unexpected rush through her. "I don't want to overstep," Lucas continued quietly, "but if you ever need someone to listen, I'm here." Evelyn felt the weight of his words, the sincerity in his eyes. It was all too easy to lean into this comfort, to step outside the boundaries she'd once set. The intimacy that had been missing from her marriage suddenly felt like it was within reach. But something held her back. This wasn't what David had in mind, was it? She didn't know anymore. "I appreciate that, Lucas," she said softly, pulling her hand away. "But I'm not sure what I'm looking for right now." Lucas gave her a knowing look, the unspoken tension hanging between them. "Take your time," he said with a gentle smile. "I just want you to be happy, Evelyn." As Lucas turned and walked away, Evelyn stood there, the question still lingering in her mind. What exactly was she looking for? And was she ready to explore what David had suggested? Or was this just the beginning of something she wasn't sure she could control? The boundaries she had once set felt thinner than ever. The town's annual festival was in full swing, with laughter and music filling the air as the sky deepened into twilight. Evelyn stood by the edge of the festival grounds, her fingers tightly clutching the fabric of her dress. The fireflies danced around her, but she felt a disconnect from the joy around her. Her heart was heavy, torn between the life she thought she knew and the uncertain path that seemed to stretch before her now. David had insisted they attend the festival together, hoping it might break the tension between them. But as they walked through the crowd, his hand remained stiff in hers, his eyes distracted. He had been quiet all evening, lost in thoughts she couldn't reach. Evelyn had felt his distance more than ever tonight, and the weight of the unspoken words hung between them. She glanced around the festival, her eyes catching sight of Lucas laughing with some of the other townsfolk. A few feet away, Noah, the mysterious newcomer who had recently moved to Westbrook, stood watching her. His intense gaze sent a shiver down her spine, and she quickly looked away, feeling the sudden need to escape the charged atmosphere. "Are you okay?" David's voice startled her. She hadn't realized he had followed her to the edge of the festival. Evelyn forced a smile. "I'm fine. Just thinking." David stepped closer, his gaze softening for a brief moment. "About what?" "About us." Evelyn nodded, her heart pounding. This was it. She had to make a choice, and she had no idea what the right answer was. David lowered his voice, his eyes filled with frustration and vulnerability. "I want us to move forward, Evelyn. I want us to find a way back to what we were. But I also know that things can't stay the same. I can't pretend that I haven't been asking you to consider things that are hard, but I think they could help us. I want us to rediscover each other." Evelyn's chest tightened. She had thought about David's proposal every day since their conversation. Could she truly open up their marriage to something new? Could it help them find each other again? Or would it only drive them further apart? She looked at David, his expression earnest, yet shadowed with doubt. He seemed so sure, Yet part of her felt he was just as lost as she was. "What do you really want, David?" she asked, her voice a whisper, barely audible over the noise of the festival. David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I can't stand the way things are now. I just want to feel like we're alive again, like we matter to each other." Evelyn's mind flashed to Lucas, to the unspoken connection she had with him, then to Noah, whose presence seemed to pull at her in a way that made her feel both seen and yet so unsure of herself. And she thought of the days when David had once made her feel loved, complete, and cherished. But now that seemed so distant, so foreign. "I can't make a decision like this tonight," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "I need more time, David." He didn't argue. Instead, he simply nodded, his eyes filled with understanding, though his shoulders slumped in resignation. As the fireworks burst overhead, Evelyn felt the weight of her decision pressed down on her. She had to choose whether to stay in the marriage as it was, to open her heart to new possibilities, or to walk away from it all and start over. The choice was hers alone, but the fear of making the wrong one gnawed at her. And as the last firework lit up the sky, Evelyn couldn't help but wonder, would she ever find the clarity she needed?